faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we'll be interpreting the book The Erased for You. Its subtitle is The Kitakushu Serial Confinement Murder Case. How much do you know about domestic violence and psychological manipulation? Feel free to share your thoughts in our comment section. The Kitakushu serial confinement murder case is one of Japan's most notorious criminal cases. The main perpetrator, Yasutaka Matsunaga, subjected his wife, Junko Asahina, to 2 decades of domestic violence and psychological manipulation, turning her into his accomplice. Between 1996 and 1998, they confined, abused, and murdered 7 people, 6 of whom were Junko's relatives.
Even more horrifyingly, through psychological manipulation, Matsunaga made victims endure abuse while monitoring each other, informing on one another, and even turning family against family.
What kind of person was this Yasutaka Matsunaga? How did 20 years of abuse turn Junko Asahina into a cold-blooded murderer's accomplice? How were Junko's family members murdered one by one?
Why didn't they resist?
Why didn't they escape? Seeking answers to these questions, the book's author, Masayoshi Toyota, attended the trial proceedings. Masayoshi Toyota graduated from Waseda University's School of Humanities, worked as a reporter for a Japanese magazine in New York, and later became a freelance writer. Domestic violence is one of his key areas of focus. With few surviving witnesses, Toyota painstakingly interviewed involved parties and their relatives to reconstruct the truth. In this book, he primarily uses Junko's testimonies and confessions, supplemented by Matsunaga's court statements and prosecutor's summaries, to record the full picture of the case truthfully and plainly. No, the Chinese edition, divided into 5 chapters, became a popular nonfiction book on Dubon after publication. In this book, we'll witness how domestic violence and psychological manipulation strip people of their moral boundaries and survival instincts. Now I'll break down the book's main content into 3 parts. First, the dangerous relationship. Second, the first victim. Third, the murdered family. All right, let's begin with the first part, exploring the early lives of Yasutaka Matsunaga and Junko Asahina and how their toxic relationship formed. Yasutaka Matsunaga was born in 1961 in Kokura Kita Ward, Kitakishu, northeastern Japan, as the eldest son in a family that ran a futon sales business. Matsunaga never studied hard as a kid, yet his grades were surprisingly good. He held student leadership positions multiple times, and even won the school speech contest in junior high, but nobody recognized him. Teachers liked Matsunaga. His 9th grade homeroom teacher described him as authoritarian, attention-seeking, and boastful, claiming he could contact Konosuke Matsushita, Panasonic's founder, anytime. Matsunaga also gathered a gang of underlings to commit misdeeds. After high school, Matsunaga took over the family business, later incorporated it as a company, boasting 17 core operations spanning trade, mining, food service, advertising, publishing, and more. But its real business was fraud. Matsunaga had employees contact acquaintances with a story about excess inventory, threatening bankruptcy, pleading for help to trick them into buying pricey betting sets. During his business run, Matsunaga earned at least 180 million yen, roughly equivalent to 9 million yen. Matsunaga was also a player with women. His tactic was casting a wide net, hitting on people everywhere. Once someone bit, he'd show up in a luxury car as a young entrepreneur. Plus, he excelled at reading minds, smooth talking, and pandering, making conquests easy. By his own admission, Matsunaga kept about 10 lovers simultaneously. In summer 1980, Matsunaga set his sights on 18-year-old high school alum Junko Asahina, a year younger than him. Born in 1962 in Kurume City, Fukuoka Prefecture, northern Kyushu, the Asahina family was village aristocracy, generations deep in lettuce farming. Her grandfather served as a village councilman. Father Tamaki Asahina was deputy director of an agricultural cooperative body. Mother Shizumi graduated from a prestigious local high school. The Asahinas were locally revered for their integrity, diligence, and strictness. Junko and her younger sister Riko received a solid, strict upbringing. Neither sister ever rebelled. After junior college, Junko became a kindergarten teacher. Riko became a dental hygienist after vocational school. Both sisters were well regarded at work. Nearly everyone expected them to live smooth, parent-approved lives, but Matsunaga's call changed everything. Spotting Junko's photo in the high school yearbook, he called her. "Back in school, you lent me 50 yen. Now I want to repay you." You should know, in the 1980s, taxis in Tokyo started at 10,000 yen, so 50 yen was practically nothing. Junko didn't recall the loan at all, but couldn't resist Matsunaga's sweet talk on the phone and agreed to meet him. Perhaps Matsunaga came across as too slick. Initially, Junko wasn't very fond of Matsunaga, and he kept pursuing others, even got married and had a son. But in the autumn of 1982, when Junko turned 20, she got another call from Matsunaga. They went for a drive, then to a love hotel, and had sex. From then on, Junko became infatuated with Matsunaga. Even after learning about his wife and child, she chose to stay in the relationship. At first, Matsunaga was incredibly gentle with Junko, whispering, "I love you," and promising to divorce soon to marry into her family. But in 1984, their affair was exposed. Junko's uncle discovered Matsunaga was investigating the assets of the Asahina family and her maternal grandparents, clearly showing he was after money. Junko was told by her parents to cut ties with Matsunaga immediately. But Matsunaga requested to meet Junko's parents. He even drafted a marriage confirmation letter, promising in writing to divorce his wife and marry Junko. He solemnly presented the letter to her parents, and his act as an upstanding young man easily won over the Asahina family. Junko recalled, "Especially my mom was completely smitten with him and fully approved of us dating." But right after that, their relationship began to change. Matsunaga first delayed the divorce by claiming his father-in-law was investing in his business. Then the violence against Junko began. Over trivial matters, he became violent toward her, and the frequency increased. Sometimes he'd beat her from night till morning, and he'd scrutinize her diary word by word, interrogating her as he went.
Who is this person?
What does this mean? If unsatisfied, he'd hit her, even branding her with his name. Once with a cigarette butt, another time with a pen and blue ink. At first, Junko would wonder what she'd done to deserve the beatings. But with repeated interrogations, the same things were questioned over and over, demanding specific details. Over time, Junko began suspecting she truly was at fault. The author notes this mindset is common among domestic violence victims.
When trapped in an isolated world with constant violence and indoctrination,
Being told you're wrong destroys self-esteem, making victims self-condemn and believe beatings are deserved. Gradually, victims lose resistance, endure silently, and comply with all demands. But psychological harm alone wasn't enough to fully control Junko. Matsunaga ordered Junko to call loved ones, reading vulgar scripts he prepared, making them cut ties in outrage. Dr. Judith Herman, an American psychologist, states that complete enslavement requires disempowerment and isolation of victims. Only when victims destroy their own ethics and sever social bonds does psychological manipulation complete its final stage. Matsunaga's methods perfectly aligned with these steps. In February 1985, overwhelmed, Junko attempted suicide by cutting her wrists at home, but was saved when family found her. Instead of remorse, Matsunaga felt he'd been too lenient with Junko. He proposed taking full custody of Junko rather than letting her stay with family. And, astonishingly gullible, Junko's parents were persuaded by him yet again. Both parents were later murdered, leaving their motives unknown. The author speculates their reputation obsession was exploited by Matsunaga, even requesting silent ambulances during Junko's suicide crisis. Societal pressure enabling horror. After discharge, Matsunaga took Junko to Yanagawa City, where he beat her daily and forced nude photos. Within 2 weeks, coerced by Matsunaga, she quit kindergarten, removed herself from family registry, severing all social ties. Junko lived upstairs at his company. Absurdly, his wife Ms. A lived downstairs and witnessed the abuse.
Like grabbing Junko's hair, shaking her head, or smearing mayonnaise on the floor, ordering her to lick it clean.
Miss A herself was a victim of Matsunaga's abuse. For her child's sake, she endured until 1992, 7 years after Junko moved in, before escaping with her child. She went straight to the police station and filed a domestic violence complaint. With welfare agencies' help, she evaded Matsunaga's search, eventually divorced him, and lived peacefully. After that, though not legally married to Matsunaga, Junko became his de facto wife and bore him 2 sons in 1993 and 1996. But the children's birth made it even harder for Junko to escape this dangerous relationship. What struck Miss A most about Junko was her silence. Miss A told the author, "When beaten, I cried so loudly neighbors could hear, but Junko neither cried nor begged him to stop. She just clenched her teeth and endured silently." At Matsunaga's company, Junko was forced to scam friends and relatives, like selling prepaid cards, then stealing the loaded money. In July 1992, after failing at a bank, Matsunaga and Junko threatened the manager and smashed a table. Police issued warrants, discovering they'd scammed an old woman of 3.5 million yen, approximately 167,000 yuan. Another warrant followed, abandoning 90 million yen in debt. They bankrupted the company, fled, and settled in Kokura, Kita-Kyushu, Matsunaga's birthplace. In Kokura, Matsunaga's criminal vision crystallized. He sought sponsors, targets to exploit for fugitive funds. Per the author, at least 4 sponsors suffered extreme cruelty under Matsunaga. 1 escaped sensing danger. 1 entered a mental hospital. 2 died. A female victim was tricked into marriage, abused, extorted over 10 million yen from family, then jumped into the sea after giving Matsunaga the money. The other victim, Kiyotomo Fukube, was the first directly killed by Matsunaga and Junko. Now we enter the second part of our interpretation. Kiyoshi Fukube, born in 1961, divorced with a daughter Kyoko, worked as a real estate agent. During their flight, Matsunaga had Junko pose under fake identities to rent at least 6 apartments under various pretenses. But Seiji never asked too many questions and just kept providing convenience for them. Matsunaga felt that Seiji, for money, would definitely do whatever it takes. He lied to Seiji, claiming his surname was Gong-chi, graduated from the University of Tokyo, was a computer engineer, worked at a Hitachi subsidiary, now started his own business, and was occasionally invited by NASA for research. He suggested to Seiji that they co-found a horse racing prediction company. Seiji easily believed it and even got money from his live-in girlfriend, Miss B, to buy a computer as office equipment for the new company. From then on, Seiji drank with Matsunaga every day until dawn, and his personality began to change. Previously, Seiji had been very family-oriented. Yes, he was good to Miss B and his 3 children, but suddenly started speaking harshly to Miss B. In 1994, after knowing Matsunaga for over a year, Seiji suddenly proposed to break up with Miss B. He first moved into the company dormitory with his 10-year-old daughter Kyoka, signed an agreement with Matsunaga entrusting him to raise his daughter, and handed over all his monthly salary of 200,000 yen to Matsunaga. Ooh. Part of the reason may be related to Junko having been a kindergarten teacher with rich childcare experience. Not long after, Seiji was fired from his company for outsourcing work, moved into Matsunaga's M apartment in Kokura, and began a life of confinement and abuse. Ironically, this apartment was exactly the one Seiji helped Matsunaga find, but it became his own prison and place of death. A common method of abuse was electrocution. The electrocution device was originally made by one of Matsunaga's former employees as a prank, only causing a slight tingling sensation. But Matsunaga modified the device, greatly increasing its power, causing ulcerative burns on the electrified areas. At first, Matsunaga used electrocuting Seiji as a drinking game. While drinking at night, he'd make Seiji squat with his upper body straight, then explain why he was being electrocuted. Um, you know, his reasons were usually trivial matters, and then Junko would operate the electrocution. During the electrocution, Matsunaga would lecture and interrogate Seiji. Each electrocution session could last intermittently for over an hour, with several sessions each night. But amusement wasn't Matsunaga's goal. He did this mainly to extract money from Seiji, which brings us to Matsunaga's life creed. Never take responsibility. He never does anything himself, nor does he directly threaten Seiji to get money. Instead, he beats around the bush, finds excuses to repeatedly electrocute Seiji while coaxing him into saying he'll go get money himself. Well, what? Besides electrocution, he uses other ways to abuse Seiji, like biting him or pinching him with pliers. But Matsunaga doesn't do it personally. He instructs Junko and Seiji's daughter, Kyoko, to do it. For example, don't blindly hit the face. Aim for the gums so it doesn't swell and works better. Or use the pliers tip to pinch a tiny bit of flesh and twist it off. He also imposed all sorts of restrictions on Seiji's life, like only allowing 2 meals a day of plain rice or noodles, no veggies or meat at all. While eating, he had to squat. Matsunaga locked him in a wooden cage to sleep, blaming Seiji's snoring, and ordered him to sleep sitting up. Even in bitter cold, he got no blanket. Even Seiji's bathroom trips were strictly limited in number and timing. If he couldn't hold it, he had to eat his own waste. As the abuse worsened, Seiji obeyed Matsunaga's will, borrowing from parents and friends, plus taking out high-interest loans repeatedly, totaling about 10 million yen for Matsunaga. And, gradually, parents and friends all refused to lend him any more money. After he couldn't get money, Matsunaga's electrocution of Seiji got even worse. Seiji's finger skin rotted off, exposing bone, and his arms stopped working. By late 1995, after about a year confined, Seiji developed a speech disorder. Talking got harder. He became severely thin. His face darkened scarily, and he showed no expression. He'd sometimes mutter about Yan Luo Delong, or say threads were coming out of his wrists, while repeatedly making pulling motions.
Hearing this, you might find it unbelievable. Seiji, a grown man, could have had a chance if he fought back, but per Junko and Kyoko's accounts, he never even tried resisting or asking for help. Why didn't he fight or escape?
This might partly relate to Matsunaga having leverage over him. When Seiji still had a job, he once got drunk and admitted embezzling tenants' disinfection fees, but never actually disinfecting the properties. Taking advantage, Matsunaga had Seiji write a confession. Later, Matsunaga also forced Seiji to write at least 2 statements admitting he stole company money and committed sexual assault. When Seiji refused to admit things he hadn't done, Matsunaga would electrocute him or dunk Kyoko's head in water to threaten Seiji. And Kyoko was undoubtedly Seiji's greatest leverage and weakness, yet he personally handed her over to Matsunaga. On the other hand, the book's author believes Seiji, after long-term electrocution and confinement, might have been in a state of learned helplessness. American psychologist Martin Seligman conducted experiments where dogs were confined in cages and subjected to continuous electric shocks. At first, the dogs tried to escape, but soon they learned escape was impossible and stopped resisting altogether. Even when the cage door was wide open, the dogs wouldn't escape. In fact, not only Seiji, but Junko and Kyoko also developed this learned helplessness mindset under Matsunaga's long-term physical abuse and psychological control. They were too afraid of severe electrocution and other punishments, so they dared not defy Matsunaga in any way. Even when alone outside, they wouldn't escape or seek help. On February 26, 1996, Seiji died from physical exhaustion. Under Matsunaga's guidance, Kyoko and Junko began dismembering Seiji's body and disposing of it in the sea or public toilets under cover of night. After Seiji's death, his daughter Kyoko continued living under Matsunaga's control. Matsunaga found a new sponsor, again using marriage fraud and abuse to extract money. But the sponsor seized an opportunity to jump out a window and escape. Matsunaga then vented his anger on Junko.
He made Junko ask her family for money, but they refused!
In April 1997, desperate Junko abandoned her 2 children and fled to northeastern Kyushu, finding a job as a hostess. But the day before starting work, she received a message from her family. Oh, I, I,
Yeah.
They took turns telling Junko that Matsunaga had jumped into the sea and committed suicide, and that she must return immediately, no matter what. But as soon as Junko got home, she found Matsunaga was perfectly alive. It turned out Matsunaga had conspired with his own family to set this trap. For the next events, Junko only remembers being beaten and electrocuted for several days straight. Her right little toe and fourth toe were fused together from electrocution-induced ulcers, and her big toe was missing a chunk of flesh. But she can't recall whether it was family members or Matsunaga who did it, or how it happened. This is called dissociative amnesia, where people experience unbearable pain during major upheavals, leading to emotional and perceptual numbness, feeling that what's happening isn't real, or losing memory. This condition is very common among abuse victims. So why did Junko Asahina's family collude with Matsunaga to trick her into coming home? And how did this lead to the tragedy of the Asahina family? Now we will move into the interpretation of the third part. Since all the victims of the murdered family had died, the author could only speculate based on Matsunaga's modus operandi. He believes that Matsunaga likely told the Asahina family that Junko killed Seiji and dismembered him. Given the Asahina family's face-saving nature, they chose to cooperate with Matsunaga to protect their reputation. In short, after Junko was caught escaping, her parents and sister began frequently visiting the M apartment in Kokura, drinking and talking all night with Matsunaga about how to deal with Junko in the future. Thus, the topic naturally evolved into needing a lot of money to take care of the murderer. According to the investigation results of Japanese prosecutors, from April to July 1997, which was when Junko escaped and was caught again, within 3 months, the Asahina family gave Matsunaga a total of 13.5 million yen, approximately 670,000 yuan. In August, the Asahina family mortgaged their land and house to the agricultural cooperative, borrowed 30 million yen, and gave it all to Matsunaga. People close to the Asahina family could sense something was wrong. Junko's father, Tamaki Asahina, was the deputy director of the agricultural cooperative. His colleagues recalled that during that period, he was often absent from home, couldn't be contacted, and a once talkative person became taciturn and distracted. When going to city hall meetings, Tamaki Asahina sometimes had messy hair, unshaven beard, and even wore rubber slippers. Relatives noticed something amiss even more. In September 1997, Tamaki Asahina's 2 younger brothers learned that the ancestral land and house had been mortgaged, so they convened a family meeting. The president, Markin. But at the meeting, no matter what they were asked, Tamaki and his wife hemmed and hawed vaguely, so relatives tried to use legal procedures to stop it. Tamaki Asahina continued selling ancestral property and also provided police with clues about Matsunaga and Junko's whereabouts. As we mentioned earlier, Matsunaga and Junko were still wanted by police for charges like personal threats and fraud. It was probably then that Matsunaga decided not to let the Asahina family return to their Kurume home, but to imprison them in the M apartment in Kokura. How did he pull it off? He used 3 main tactics. First, make the Asahina family accomplices,
Matsunaga told Tamaki Asahina that traces of Seiji's dismemberment might remain in the kitchen pipes, demanding he replace them, thus making Tamaki complicit and eliminating his resistance.
As deputy director of the agricultural cooperative, Tamaki wanted promotion to director, but had two rivals. He couldn't afford mistakes. Plus, Tamaki had strong self-esteem and cared deeply about others' opinions. The author believes Tamaki couldn't bear seeing his daughter jailed yet feared his own downfall if her crimes surfaced. Forcing compliance, Natsunaga's second tactic, sowing discord among family members. Next target was Junko's brother-in-law. Kazunori had married into the family, no blood relation to Junko, so logically he wouldn't sacrifice much for her. As a former policeman with strong morals, Kazunori was vulnerable. Matsunaga drove wedges during drinking sessions. For example, he told Kazunori the Asahina's promised land transfers but never followed through. They were just using that promise to deceive him. And then Matsunaga, who became a live-in son-in-law, he also claimed Kazunori's wife, Riko, had premarital pregnancies or abortions and post-marriage affairs with colleagues. These secrets were extracted during earlier drinking sessions. These revelations devastated Kazunori. A rift formed with the Asahinas, making it unlikely he'd lead resistance. Instead, his guard dropped. He complained to Matsunaga about the family and even hit his in-laws and wife's heads under Matsunaga's instigation. He also helped Matsunaga replace bathroom tiles, becoming an accomplice. In summer 1997, Matsunaga convinced Kazunori to bring his 9-year-old daughter Ayasa and 4-year-old son Yuki to Kokura to see the summer festival. After summer break, the children never left. They became Matsunaga's hostages. From October to November that year, Kazunori, Riko, and Tamaki resigned, just dropping letters in company mailboxes before vanishing. Meanwhile, the Asahina family's bank accounts were completely drained. Police later discovered that Junko's mother, Shizumi Asahina, had also borrowed the maximum amount from multiple loan sharks. By this point, Matsunaga had extorted at least 63 million yen from the Asahina family, equivalent to over 3 million yuan. But the Asahinas had exhausted their usefulness. They'd maxed out loans from loan sharks and lost their jobs, making further borrowing impossible. Just like Seiji, they would die one by one under brutal confinement, abuse, and humiliation. In fact, electrocution had started even before their formal confinement began. Everyone except 4-year-old Yuki was electrocuted. Even 9-year-old Ayasa wasn't spared. We won't dwell further here on the horrors of the Asahina family's confinement. Notably, Matsunaga's third method of control was a hierarchy system. He ranked everyone around him on a vertical hierarchy. Naturally, Matsunaga himself was at the top, while those at the bottom were abused. The hierarchy was constantly shifting, keeping every Asahina on edge. They became rivals, filled with hostility toward each other. If someone was demoted to the bottom for no reason, others would breathe a sigh of relief. Thankfully, it's not me, they'd think, then use absolute obedience to avoid demotion, while the lowest ranked would desperately please Matsunaga, even betraying family to climb higher. The hierarchy combined with electrocution created a collective psychological fixation. They lost self-judgment, treated Matsunaga's orders as absolute, and prioritized his interests above all. Though, Junko testified that days of electrocution made people feel detached from themselves. They stopped questioning right and wrong, just blindly followed orders to avoid angering Matsunaga. They even developed dependence on Matsunaga. For instance, after giving up most of his wealth, Tamaki Asahina told Matsunaga, "At this point, I can only survive by relying on you, Mr. Matsunaga." The book's author believes the Asahina's psychological state resembled that of Nazi concentration camp prisoners. According to research by Dr. Cohen, a Jewish psychiatrist, camp prisoners progressed from fear to apathy, then to extreme dependence on the Nazis, despite knowing they could be killed anytime. Prisoners also fought each other, tormented the weaker, abandoned family, or became Nazi collaborators. On December 21st, 1997, over a month after the Asahina family collectively disappeared into confinement, the first death occurred. Junko's father, Tamaki Asahina, died after being electrocuted. After his death, his daughter and son-in-law went out to buy dismemberment tools. The cost for required tools was covered by Junko's mother, Shizumi, writing IOUs to borrow from Matsunaga. After Tamaki's death, 58-year-old Shizumi became the bottom of the hierarchy. After half a month of intense abuse, Shizumi began making strange noises like, ah, woo. She refused to drink or eat. Matsunaga declared Shizumi mentally unsound, worried her noises might be heard outside. He ordered the Asahina family to discuss how to handle Shizumi. Suggestions to rent her another apartment or send her to a mental hospital were rejected by Matsunaga. Additionally, Matsunaga heavily hinted, I can lend you money. Hearing this, Junko instantly understood Matsunaga meant lending money to buy tools for dismembering her mother. In January 1998, Shizumi was strangled with a wire by her own family. That February, Junko's 33-year-old sister Rieko was also strangled with wire by family after showing deafness and other abnormalities. In April, 38-year-old brother-in-law Kazunori died from physical exhaustion, emaciated, unable to walk from constant standing and retching continuously. In May and June, Matsunaga ordered Junko and Kyoko to kill Kazunori and Riko's children. Except 5-year-old Yuiki, all victims had participated in strangling or dismembering relatives. The last to die, Ayasa, was just 10.
Ayasa begged Matsunaga. She said, I won't tell anything, but he remained unmoved.
Before dying, Ayasa silently walked to the kitchen and lay face up where her brother died. When Junko and Kyoko placed the wire, she lifted her head slightly to make it easier. After placing the wire around her own neck, Matsunaga lived in Kokura with Junko, Kyoko, and his 2 sons with Junko, continuing to seek new sponsors. The case only came to light in March 2002, when 17-year-old Kyoko fled unbearable abuse, leading to Matsunaga and Junko's arrest. In May 2003, the Kitakushu serial confinement murder case officially entered trial proceedings. During the trial, Matsunaga justified all his crimes, like electrocuting victims, as necessary. He argued it wasn't abuse but disciplinary electrocution. Since we all lived together, we needed to maintain some order. Electrocution was merely a substitute for violence to uphold that order. He also emphasized obtaining victims' consent before electrocuting them. After electrocutions, he'd tell victims good work, sometimes even pouring them drinks. From the author's observations in court, Matsunaga's testimony was riddled with contradictions. While denying murder, he painted the Asahina family as villains who killed each other. Though before meeting him, they were just ordinary people, but dead men tell no tales. Even during trial, Matsunaga never missed a chance to perform. His closing statement ran 40 minutes, quadruple the limit, yet was hollow and painful to hear. How did such a man manipulate so many into becoming his victims with sweet talk? In 2005, the court sentenced main perpetrators Yasutaka Matsunaga and Junko Asahina to death. Junko's sentencing sparked debate. Did she harbor murderous intent? Did she possess independent judgment during crimes? Professor Yoji Kanatani, psychiatry expert at Tsukuba University, noted Junko's post-Matsunaga behavioral shifts showed classic abuse victim traits. Low self-worth, assuming blame for abusers' actions. One example. While escaping, Junko still considered Matsunaga's feelings, planning suicide without inconveniencing him. Furthermore, years of abuse made rational behavior, like avoiding murder, nearly impossible for Junko. Professor Kanatani stated constant electrocution forced Junko into hyperfocus on avoiding shocks, obliterating rational choice or motive awareness. Thus, she prioritized deciphering Matsunaga's will and executing his commands flawlessly. Even when Matsunaga's orders were vague, Junko instantly treated them as absolute standards, denying herself critical thought. Matsunaga appeared to exploit this vulnerability to the maximum. For instance, before killing Junko's mother, Shizumi, Matsunaga said, "I can lend you money." Junko immediately understood and carried it out. In 2007, the second trial judge still recognized Matsunaga as the mastermind and sentenced Junko to death. Junko was an accomplice. The judge believed that Junko's ability to discern right from wrong was intact, rejecting the defense team's claim of mental illness.
The basis was that Junko had suggested to Matsunaga to entrust her sister's 2 children to relatives, not kill them.
However, the second trial judgment acknowledged the impact of electrocution and domestic violence, recognizing that Junko's judgment was impaired. And since she provided important clues after arrest, her sentence was commuted to life imprisonment.
In 2011, Japan's Supreme Court dismissed Matsunaga's appeal, acknowledging that although Junko was the one who carried out the killings, she could hardly disobey Matsunaga's orders. Therefore, Matsunaga was the mastermind, and his death sentence was upheld. After arrest, freed from Matsunaga's control, Junko's humanity gradually recovered. About a year after the second trial judgment, the author received a letter from Junko expressing repentance to the victims' families and longing and remorse for her own children. She vowed to atone as much as possible in her lifetime, becoming sensitive to life and death, and fearing the taste of loss. She also wrote, "I am grateful to finally be free from Matsunaga and have time to live my own life. Though this so-called free life must be spent behind bars." After hearing about this bizarre serial confinement murder case, what are your thoughts? Feel free to leave comments and discuss with us. This concludes our interpretation of the book The Erased Family. Listening notes are below the audio.